Hello again. In part one of our screencast on Mussolini and fascism, you saw how Mussolini used his background as a former socialist, a former publisher, a former veteran, to basically bluff and bully his way into absolute control of Italy's government by 1922. In this part of our screencast, we're going to take a look at what Mussolini did after he got into power, and we'll finish up by showing you his connections to the man that at one time learned from him and later would become his mentor, Adolf Hitler. Here we go. Mussolini was known to his people as Il Duce, which means the Duke or simply the boss. Probably the thing that Mussolini is most noted for is the creation of something called the corporate state. In fact, he quoted, "Fascism should more appropriately be called corporatism because it's a merger of state and corporate power." Note the Venn diagram here in the lower left-hand corner. In Mussolini's view, fascism is basically where corporate influence, big business, and government corruption intersect. You see that here also in this diagram, where you see government, foundations, businesses all crossing over, where ultimately the public, government, and big business, private, end up working together. That's basically what the corporate state is. Public-private partnership. Government and big business, in effect, the citizens of the government basically become customers for the corporation. It's a little bit different than the laissez-faire that a right-wing political thinker normally favors. Okay? In this case, government isn't just staying out of big business, government's actually working hand in hand with business to keep it big. And that's the corporate state under Mussolini. One other thing that Mussolini did, and I hate to use such a cute little baby to illustrate it, but this was the policy. What Mussolini called the battle for births. Mussolini wanted to build up Italy's population. Again, it's sad to use a cute little baby here because ultimately, what do you think the goal was of having all of these kids? If you guessed build up the population to create a bigger army, you're absolutely right. In fact, Mussolini treated it very much like a military operation. Moms who had lots of kids would get medals. This is something that Hitler would pick up on in the 1930s when he takes control of Germany. On the flip side, men who chose not to get married and have lots of kids ended up having to pay taxes. Not unlike the beard tax you might remember Peter the Great levying on Russians way back in the 1700s. Mussolini, being Italian and centered in Rome, had to deal with the Catholic Church, which was a worldwide force on its own. He did so through something called the Lateran Treaty. In this treaty, he allowed the Vatican, the headquarters of the Roman Church, to become an independent state, even though it was contained within the city limits of Rome. In return, Mussolini's government got the approval of the church. So basically it was, you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone, and the two agreed to coexist with one another. A nice arrangement that kept both sides clear of the other's influence. Mussolini also was known for his acts in land development. He drained swamps to get rid of mosquitoes and therefore to get rid of malaria. As you can see here from the pictures, he was able to convert lots of land into lots of space for families. He was also noted for his work with trains, planes, automobiles, in short, Italy's infrastructure. One of the most famous quotes about Mussolini as to why people liked him was, "He made the trains run on time." Which he did, although it didn't really take that much to do it. They'd always run on time. He just made a big show of keeping it going. He did expand Italy's air force, which he'd used to very good effect against the defenseless country of Ethiopia in 1935. He also expanded the infrastructure of roads and highways. Mussolini, being a car collector and a car enthusiast, you see him here in his Ferrari from the 1930s. And in one respect, all of this looks really good for him. Okay, it makes him appear that he's doing lots of great things for Italy, and in fact, for a lot of people in Italy, they saw this as a very good thing. But underneath it all, keep in mind that Mussolini was ultimately gaining more and more control over the people themselves. To make sure that he got the credit for all of this, he was a master of propaganda. Here you see a couple of pictures that illustrate Mussolini's speaking ability. In the left-hand picture that you see here, you'll note that there's a microphone. Mussolini was one of the first leaders to see the promise of mass communication, such as radio, which was becoming more and more popular in the 20s and 30s. He also saw the advantages of newsreel cameras and film. As you can see here in the left-hand picture, he's very fond of gesturing, particularly with the closed fist. As you look at this sequence of pictures from a speech that he made from a balcony in Rome, you can see here that he's also very animated, leaning in, wagging a finger, leaning back to make a point, throwing his head back, pumping the fist. It's not unlike watching a Hulk Hogan or Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson throwing a pro wrestling promo in there, telling the enemies of the state what he's going to do to them if he ever gets them, and telling the people how great he is, and generally making it quite the spectacle of himself. And always the message was the same: Mussolini is always right. Keep in mind, we've made the point before that totalitarian states often don't deliver what they promise. For example, in this picture, Mussolini promises us that he's a family man. That's his wife Raquel on the left, and you see their 5 children. Just the perfect household, the perfect family. In real life, Mussolini was not quite the family man. In fact, he was a notorious womanizer. This book cover shows an Italian actress by the name of Clara Petacci. Clara Petacci became Mussolini's mistress in 1932 and carried on an affair with him that lasted until their mutual deaths in 1945. When Mussolini was finally captured by anti-fascist partisans, Clara was with him, and what happened to them is not something that is for the faint of heart. We'll discuss this more in the World War II unit. Mussolini often wanted to show that he was a man of the people, even if he was an absolute ruler, an absolute dictator. He was fond of having himself photographed in working clothes, doing work right alongside the common people. As you can see here, in the upper left and the lower right, he's working with his favorite uniform of working in agriculture, bringing in sheaves of grain while wearing his trusty goggles. I'm not sure why he wore the goggles during this whole bit. You can see him down in the lower left as well. He liked to take his shirt off. You might watch the news these days and see Vladimir Putin of Russia doing the same thing. Mussolini and Putin both like to run around without their shirt on. If you want an explanation for that, you're probably better off taking psychology as a junior or senior. They might be better to explain it than I could. Mussolini wrestled with lions. Imagine his people watching him do this stuff in photographs. Even Americans were impressed, as you can see from the Time magazine cover on the right here. This guy actually wrestles with wild animals. Of course, there were a number of conditions attached. 1. The lions had to be cubs. 2. They had to have their teeth and claws taken out. And 3. They had to be sedated. Basically, if you have a cat, take out its teeth, take out its claws, and dope it up, you could probably wrestle with your cat. Not to recommend it. Do not try this at home, even if your cat is sedate. But again, what you promise and what you deliver, two different things, and the Italian people didn't know any better. Mussolini had an odd fashion sense. As the head of Italy's military as well as its government, Mussolini was fond of creating different uniforms to represent different elements of the army. For example, the naval uniforms shown on the left. The middle outfit represents a mountain unit in the Italian army, and his favorite helmet on the right side. Again, a different outfit for every occasion. Interestingly, when he dressed in civilian clothes, he wasn't quite as impressive. He preferred tails and spats, really stuff that was about 5 to 10 years behind the times. Most of it was based on his favorite movie stars, the comedy team of Laurel and Hardy, shown here. Mussolini also created the fascist youth movement to build a nation in his image. As you look at these people, these kids, you'll notice that they're giving the upraised right arm in salute. We tend to think of this as the Heil Hitler sign. In reality, it started with Mussolini and the fascists, and in fact, this symbol was taken from an ancient Roman salute. Remember that the symbol of fascism is an ancient Roman symbol, the fascia. This training started at the age of 7, the same age that Spartan boys were taken for military training in ancient Greece. As you can see, they were taught how to handle weapons, they were taught how to march in formation, how to wear the uniform proudly, and even their notebooks, as you see here, were designed to prepare them for the life of the soldier. This is where the battle for berths really came into play. Lastly, let's take one look at how Mussolini first came into contact with Adolf Hitler. In 1924, Hitler had just gotten out of jail after a failed overthrow of the German government. Hitler had been a great admirer of Mussolini's, and their first contact actually happened when Hitler wrote a fan letter to Mussolini, basically asking for an autographed photo, the same way that you might write a movie star or a singer asking for a picture of them. In this case, Mussolini refused, assuming that this Hitler was kind of a nobody, which in 1924 he was. Within 10 years, Hitler would become the absolute master of Germany, using a lot of what Mussolini had done as a model. And by the time World War II comes around, their relationship has almost totally reversed. Hitler has now become the master, Mussolini becomes the pupil. And to finish up this unit, we'll look and see what the pupil, how the pupil, Hitler, became the master of fascism. See you soon.